We are now 354 days away from the midterms. The government is officially open, and the House picked up right where they left off with the Epstein files. A vote is expected next week on a measure forcing the Department of Justice to release them. And several Republicans are considering defying Trump and voting in favor of making the documents public. Politico reports, quote, the fresh wave of chaos has knocked the administration on its heels. A senior White House official insists that the latest Epstein document release is nothing more than annoying. But for the second day in a row, the president did not take questions after a signing event. Highly unusual for this president. Adding to the pressure on him, a new AP poll shows that only 33% of Americans approve of his handling of the government. That is down from 43% back in March. Even more significant, 68% of Republicans approve of his handling of the government. That number was 81% in March. Meanwhile, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell was referred to the Justice Department for a potential criminal probe over alleged mortgage fraud. If you are keeping track, he is now the fourth Democrat facing mortgage fraud allegations. All right, now let's get smarter with the leadoff panel this evening. Peter Baker is here, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Daniela Diaz, a congressional reporter for Notice. And David Drucker, senior writer at The Dispatch. Daniela, what have you been hearing from Republicans? What should we expect ahead of this vote next week, potentially?
Stephanie, it's finally happening. It's been weeks and weeks and weeks of this news cycle that Republicans have repeatedly tried to dodge. And it seems like Speaker Mike Johnson is very prepared to put this on the floor next week in an effort to really make clear that he knows that he can't avoid this, as he's tried to avoid repeatedly, as we've seen them try to do procedurally, not to have any sort of amendments to release for a vote to release the Epstein files. So now it's going to happen. We expect it to happen early next week. And we expect a lot of Republicans to vote for this. I talked to countless Republicans last night during this vote to reopen the government, asking them different swaths, different factions of the conference, asking them if they would support this measure, and a lot of them were really open to it. I do think we're going to expect dozens of Republicans to reach across the aisle on this largely Democratic measure. Of course, 4 Republicans supported it, but the Trump administration clearly not wanting this to happen. We saw in the news cycle they were calling Lauren Boebert, they were calling Marjorie Taylor Greene, trying to really convince them not to be part of this, but it's going to happen. To be clear, it still needs to go through the Senate, but if there's a lot of Republicans that support this in the House, it's going to be really hard for the Senate to ignore this.
Not just calling Lauren Boebert, bringing her to the White House, to the Situation Room. I can only imagine those conversations. David, everything that Daniela just laid out, and the Washington Post wrote about it today. The Epstein files is the one issue that consistently splits Donald Trump, not just from Republicans on the Hill, but from his actual base. What are they saying now?
Well, look, I think it's clear that the president fanned the flames of a fire that he has lost total control of. And it's rare, so rare, as we've talked about before, that House Republicans and Senate Republicans, and we'll see what happens next, but it's so rare that House Republicans defy the president in this Congress. And so to see where this is headed is really rather remarkable. Now, it'll be interesting to see exactly how big of a vote House Republicans give this in the House. But, you know, what we have seen is that this is one of those few topics where the president's base and a lot of Republican voters generally are more interested in having these files released than they are in protecting the president. And what's, interesting here is we don't know for sure that the president really has anything to worry about. I mean, some of these emails that have come out are problematic and they look, they're potentially a little embarrassing. But is it really that big of a deal? Maybe we'll find out that it is. But the point I'm making here is that the president is the one making everybody think that there's a there because of the way he's worked so hard to try and quash this. And number one, he's now a victim of events rather than dictating events. Even if you didn't like anything he was doing for the first 6 months of his presidency, he was in control of almost everything in Washington. And now he is a victim of events, and he has political problems on top of it because of the economy and how voters view his management of the economy.
Then I'm getting to Peter, but then David, tell me how right-wing media is covering this story. And I mean the corners of right-wing media that stand with the president all day, every day, yesterday and tomorrow. How are they talking about this?
Right. So I think it's important to understand that those sorts of media outlets often see Trump as an avatar to his vote, as a way to reach his voters, as an avatar to their own populist ends. And so for them, it's not so much about loyalty to the president, but about the voters and the audience that he brings them and the issues that he raises and the sort of strange figures that he elevates. And they have not let this thing go, right? I mean, I think it's more of the mainstream conservative outlets, if you will, that are treating this in a much more repertorial fashion or analytical fashion. But when you're talking about podcasts and those media outlets that we think of as particularly pro-Trump, what they are is particularly pro-populist. They want that audience, and that audience wants these files released. And so they're not there to cover for him in this instance.
And perhaps that's why Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling herself the one who's the real MAGA. Peter, take us to the toughest place to get in, the White House. Tell us where things stand. I mean, you know this better than I do. It's pretty extraordinary that we have 2 days of signing events. I mean, last night, the president's got Jamie Dimon and these Wall Street executives at the White House. He would love to have the cameras in the room for that. No questions asked.
Yeah, very unusual. Absolutely. When they say they're just finding this to be annoying, it's not annoying if you bring Lauren Boebert to the Situation Room, to lean on her, to abandon the effort to force the Epstein files to be released. That's not something that you think is annoying. That's something you think is a crisis. You only bring crises to the Situation Room. That's a place you deal with national security issues, including war and peace. So, that I think indicates the level of seriousness that they're taking this with, no matter what they're telling people and trying to brush it off. And the reason is all the reasons that we've just been talking about, because it does splinter his base. It is something that, animates a lot of the MAGA core. Why is that? I mean, look, part of the MAGA core goes back to the same conspiracy theory-minded beliefs of QAnon, which is where Marjorie Taylor Greene originates from, remember? And that core belief is that there is a ring of pedophiles out there that is running the country. And Jeffrey Epstein just fits right into that. And the idea that he was friends, not just with Donald Trump, but also Bill Clinton and obviously Larry Summers and Michael Wolff and all these other people, it just feeds into this idea that there's this elite group out there that is part of a cabal of some sort and a desire, therefore, to get to the bottom of it.
All right, Daniela, new topic. The government is now open, thank goodness, but things are not going to be getting back to normal immediately. You've got new reporting about infighting among Democrats over making this deal without securing health care subsidies. Tell us what's going on.
Stephanie, you would think that Democrats would try to figure out a message, considering they really want to take over the midterms, have successful midterms, and they had such a good night on Tuesday. But what we're seeing out of the dozens of Democrats that I talked to the past couple of days is they can't seem to agree on what the shutdown meant for them. And they really came out of this with no wins. They started this shutdown without negotiating with Republicans on anything because they said that they wanted health care provisions. They wanted to extend those Affordable Care Act tax credits. They didn't get that. All they got was a promise on a vote for a bill that Speaker Mike Johnson isn't even guaranteeing might happen. So what we're seeing is those handful of Senate moderates who negotiated this deal with Republicans call this a win. And what we're seeing is the rest of the Democratic Party really listen to that base and feel very angry that those moderates, in a way, sold them out, caved. And they don't know how to explain this to voters, and they're trying to figure that out in real time.
Okay, while they're figuring out their messaging, though, David, the administration and Republicans are the ones in the hot seat because the shutdown showed that this administration needs to act on health care. Reportedly, senior White House officials have been meeting to talk about how to address it. What have you heard about that? Because let's be honest, since Donald Trump thrust onto the political scene in 2014, he's been railing against Obamacare and offering a grand total of nothing to replace it.
Concepts of ideas to come in a short period of time. Listen, to build on what Daniela said, I just want to say I was in Overland Park, Kansas last night covering a town hall meeting with Alyssa Slotkin, the Democratic senator from Michigan. And she went hammer and tongs at Democratic leadership and the members of her caucus that participated in the compromise and leadership that she felt should have kept the caucus unified and stopped it. And so there is a lot of division. But as you mentioned, there's a victory there to take politically if they'll just take it. Because number one, Republicans were never going to cave no matter how bad the politics got for them, not on policy. They weren't going to give Democrats the Obamacare subsidy extension in exchange for opening the government. The government would still be shut down and it would have stayed shut down. But what they managed to do was something that almost never happens. They exited the shutdown with the political high ground, and Republicans divided and on the defensive over these subsidies in and of themselves, because so many Republicans want these subsidies because their voters need them. And so Democrats are in a really unique position here if they would just fight amongst themselves quietly and allow this debate to unfold the way it wants to, if you will. I will say, secondarily, none of this really matters for midterm elections. Democratic voters are going to show up to put a check on Trump in the midterm elections. And the opening of the government is actually a much better thing to do politically when you're talking about independent voters who just want the government to work.
David, I like that. I'm going to write it down. Fight amongst yourselves quietly. I think that might be my family's Catholic motto. You can annihilate yourselves inside the house, but as soon as you open that front door, you damn well better be smiling. Peter, let's talk about the president's next plan, or what the White House would like him to do. Travel the country to sell his economic message on the cost of living. Here's the thing. Donald Trump loves traveling the country. He loves doing rallies. He hasn't been doing them in Trump 2.0, 2 total. And when Joe Biden tried to do this, remember, travel the country and sell Bidenomics, the problem is when the country is feeling the pain of inflation, and now things are worse than they were in terms of inflation. Now you've got people, consumer confidence is down. People are feeling concerned about the labor market. What exactly will his message be if he does take it on the road?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to remind us that Joe Biden tried this, right? He went out and said, Bidenomics is very successful.
It infuriated people.
Yeah, people didn't like it because they felt it was disconnected from their shared experience, right? Correctly or not, whether he correctly cited various statistics and so forth, but it somehow seemed in conflict with what people experience in their day in, day out lives. Now, look, I will say this, that Trump has been much more successful than any other politician I've ever seen at selling a story. And so he has an ability to create a reality, certainly among people who support him and are open to him, he's been able to sell people on the idea that he had the greatest economy in his first term, even though it wasn't the greatest economy. It was a good economy. It wasn't the greatest economy ever. But he repeats things. He is able to say things without equivocation, without qualification, without caveat. He doesn't bother to say, well, it's really a good economy, except for, of course, this part, which we're trying to work on. No, he just simply says again and again and again and again, it's the greatest ever. And if you say it's not, he just dismisses you. And somehow that manages to get through to an awful lot of Americans. So he has a capacity to sell things that other politicians don't. Having said that, people's lives still matter to them more than what they hear from a politician. So it's going to be an uphill challenge for him.